Yes, my reflection is actually on Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. And in that, she argues that as a backlash to the Civil Rights Movement and to the Voting Rights Act, uh, the white response has been to focus on criminalizing black men in particular, but also men of color, because the from Nixon's law and order to Reagan's war on drugs, we have focused on basically the ghetto community, which is basically a black and brown community, and we've done that with you know great success. Basically, if you look at it, we've gone from a prison population beginning with Reagan at 300,000 to a prison population which is primarily black and brown, and it's somewhere near 2.3 million people right now. But when you consider that 5.1 million black and brown men are in the policing situation of probation and parole, we have a significant number of people who are now basically what you'd have to say as a felon class, because these people are not only do they have difficulty finding a job, but thanks to Bill Clinton, it's almost they can't get a housing, and nor can their family members who are in housing allow them to stay with them, or they themselves will be out of housing. So now housing, is a problem. So their homelessness is one problem they face. Joblessness is another face. And they often run into problems with probation because they're stuck in a ghetto, and they're now not allowed to visit other felons. So that poses a whole different problem, because how do you, as a felon class, try to work together to get yourself bettered? Plus, you've lost your voting rights. So we have put them in a nearly impossible situation. And it only seems to get worse as time goes on. And of course, now we have a history of this. So it goes back to our founding fathers. Uh, but then we have Jim Crow, and we've got Supreme Court cases one after another that have supported that. And we continue to have Supreme Court cases that basically support this kind of increasing involvement with the police and a gutting of the 14th Amendment to equal rights, and also to the Fourth Amendment for protection of unfair seizures, and where police can come in and check you over whatever stops and seizures. And so we have continued to create this problem, but unfortunately, even the black community, and focusing on other areas, has failed to take a look at what has happened to this particular class of people. And I want to read something to you. I mean, one of the things that happened was the McClaskey case, in which basically the Supreme Court allowed prosecutors the right to, if discrimination happened, that was considered a byproduct, and so be it. It was considered one of the worst Supreme Court cases since the Dred Scott case. But I want to read something from Judge Cahill, because what he points out is that if we treated whites in the same way that we treat blacks, we would have a total different response to the situation. And Cahill declared this. He was a federal judge who overturned a case, basically, where the gentleman had crack cocaine, and he was sentenced to a larger sentence, a harsher sentence than he would have been under powder cocaine. So he reversed that. And he did so because he believed that there was disparities between racial groups. And Cahill declared the 101 racially discriminated in violation of the 14th Amendment. notwithstanding McCloskey. Although no admission of racial bias or racial intent could be found in the record, Judge Cahill believed race was indelibly a factor in the crack sentencing laws and policies. He traced this history of the Get Tough movement to the Get Tough movement and concluded that fear coupled with unconscious racism had led to a lynch mob mentality and a desire to control crime and those he deemed responsible for it at any cost. Cahill acknowledged that many people may not believe they are motivated by discriminatory attitudes, but argued that we all have internalized fear of young Black men, a fear reinforced by media imagery that has helped to create a national image of the young Black male as criminal. The presumption of innocence is now a legal myth, he declared. The 100-to-1 ratio, coupled with mandatory minimum sentencing provided by federal statute, has created a situation that reeks of inhumanity and injustice. If the young white males were being incarcerated at the same rate as young Black males, the statute would have been amended long ago. Judge Cahill sentenced the young man as if the drug he carried home had been powdered cocaine. The sentence imposed was 4 years in prison. Now, the young man served his 4 years and was let free, but the prosecutor appealed it, and of course, the young man ended up back in jail because the courts overturned it, and he ended up finishing his sentence of 10 years. And I think this, unfortunately, I don't want to get political about it, but when you look at the history of the court from the Rehnquist court on, there has been a consistency of these cases being decided based on politics. And we somehow need to work at ourselves, recognizing our own biases, and somehow we need to get a focus on how we're going to deal with this problem because it is significant.
I ran into Jeremiah at the FFRF National Convention a year ago, a little more than a year ago, and was very struck by his film, which he presented at that time, and provided a question and answer session so people could understand a little bit more of the background. And that's what we've invited him for today, is to learn a little more of the background of this film, Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism in America. Now, I want to repeat the title because any of you who have not seen it can go to Amazon Prime and get it easily. I know it can be done because even with my limited technological skills, I was able to pull it up and watch it end to end very recently. So it can be done. Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism in America. The power of the film and the power of Jeremiah Camara's work is that it makes the obvious visible. Now, what I mean by that is that many times things that are obvious fade out of consciousness because they're around us all the time. And things like white religious iconography, white Jesus, white God, white angels, white cherubs, white saints, this is so obvious that it fades out of consciousness. And Jeremiah's film has helped to make these obvious things visible or refreshingly visible to people that have long since become insensitive to them. In any event, I very much enjoyed the film, and I enjoyed actually rewatching it recently because you miss a lot. There's a great deal of content in the film. And so I'm very delighted to introduce Jeremiah Camara, who's, you will identify him on your screen as Higgins. And that's
this is my son's computer.
But anyway, take it away, Jeremiah.
Anyway, thank you all for having me. I'm very honored to be here and looking forward to this. Thank you, Jan, for the presentation on Michelle Alexander's book, which I have read. And I thought that book was very enlightening, and I encourage everyone to read it. And some of the things that she mentions in that book, I, of course, have corresponding things in the film. So I do encourage everyone to read that book, Michelle Alexander's book called The New Jim Crow. I want to tell you a little bit about my upbringing. Again, my name is Jeremiah Camara. I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I've been married 31 years. I've got 3 children that I know of. And I've got 3 grandchildren. And one of the things that was funny when I met my wife, I asked her, because I'm 57 years old. I've been a non-believer since like about 22 years old. So I really can't tell you that struggle that I had and the backlash that I got from my family and all that, because I didn't, because I've always been that outside the box type of outlier, in my family. So I don't really have that to speak about. But when I met my wife, I kind of eased into it a little bit. I wanted to see what her views on religion was, because I really liked her. And I said, I'm just going to be straight up. I don't go to church, and I don't do religion. And she looked at me and she said, well, the only reason why I go to church is because of the good sin. And so after she said that, I knew we were going to be together. So it's been 31 years. And so I grew up in a family that we weren't really a religious family. We did go to church, but my parents weren't really forcible with me. They didn't make me go to church. We, like most Black people, did not really have an understanding of what we were into in terms of the church. We would call ourselves Baptists, but we had no background on what it was to be a Baptist and how they got started and what country it was started in and so forth. So we had these denominations without investigation, so to speak. But I do remember seeing an image in my church of a white Jesus. And we had an all-Black congregation, and I was young, but I knew something was amiss there. And I knew that the community where I grew up, I noticed that right up the street, maybe about 2 blocks, I grew up in Avondale, but then right up the street, there was a place called Rose Hill. I noticed that those houses were bigger and they just had a better quality of life. And so it didn't really resonate with me right away. It took some time. I noticed that there were 3 white kids that went to my school in elementary, and they all left. And they went to a school called CAMUS, Cincinnati Academy of Math and Science. And here we were, pretty much the only Black guys that were on the baseball team went to this school, and all the white guys went to another school. So I knew something wasn't right. Even when I prayed, I would say, instead of in the name of our Redeemer for years, probably till I was about 12 years old or 13, I was saying in the name of Amadima, because I didn't even realize that I was supposed to be saying in the name of our Redeemer. So I had no understanding. But I remember going to the dentist and going to the doctor's office. And I'm going to show a book here. I'm not proud to say it, but I did steal this book from one of the doctor's offices. Can you guys see it? And we all are familiar with this, because if you go to the doctor or go to the dentist, you'll see this book laying there. And then you look at it, it's pretty much all white children, pretty much. With Noah and everybody who's important are pretty much, white. So I saw that this default to the special people of society was the default button was set to white. And so we were made, though, we weren't forced to go to church, but we were made to watch the movie 10 Commandments, King of Kings, and of course, I can't remember the other one about Noah, but we were made to watch that. And as a young Black boy, I wondered, where were the Blacks? Where were the Mexicans? Where were the Asians? And so it just, I wouldn't say it bothered me, but it did cause me to reflect a little bit. And so I was, wondering about this, and I didn't understand. I had no understanding. And so I noticed that one of my best buddies, his name was Henry, he moved away from Cincinnati. He was a white guy, and he and I lived a couple of houses down. And I was like, I wanted to ask my mother if we could move somewhere, other than Cincinnati. And she said no. And I said, why? She didn't really go into detail, but I understood that we didn't have the privilege really of sitting down as a Black family to decide where we want to move. And I think that when you talk about white privilege, that's one of the greatest things that I notice is that you can make a decision. I want to live in Idaho, I want to live in Nebraska or Wyoming, and you have no problem. You can just go there. As a Black, the first thing that we got to do, we got to go on Wikipedia and find out the Black population there. And if we go out of town and we're on the road, we have to make sure we look around to see if there's anybody that looks like us. That's kind of how it still is to this day. But, you know, I started to study when I was in my early 20s, and I actually started studying about evolution in my early 20s. I moved to Cleveland, and I noticed that the people who understood evolution, they were less prejudiced. I won't say racist, and I'll tell you what my definition of racism is in a moment. But I'll just say they seemed to be a little less prejudiced and a little more liberal because they didn't really have this definition of creationism. Creationism seemed to carry a certain attitude with it, that there was this God who created some groups differently than he did other groups, that he created some groups to be superior and some groups to be inferior, and that was his divine plan. Because, like I said, when I went to church, we had, matter of fact, this here, I kept this, I've had this for about 20 or 30 years. I don't know if you guys can see this, but, one of the church fans, that has the white Jesus. And we just were never allowed to question any of this thing. But I just went to a funeral here since this COVID thing has been, and it was very hot. So we were outdoors, and it was a Black funeral. And they passed the fans around, and this was the fan that they passed around, the Last Supper of the white Jesus and his white disciples. And I just couldn't believe that, back in the 70s, I had this fan. And then when I come here in 2020, I had this fan. So I've always known that something was amiss here. So several years ago, there was a guy, you probably are familiar with him. His name is Jared Taylor, and he's the founder of the American Renaissance. And he doesn't think of his group as a white supremacist group. He actually thinks of it as a white advocacy group. And he claims that there are certain groups that are superior based on their intelligence. And he would say that Asians are the most intelligent group, even more so than whites. But Blacks are on the bottom, so therefore they would constitute as the least intelligent. And I just didn't think that Mr. Jarrett understood what intelligence was really about. I've never really been impressed with that because none of us have been intelligent enough to figure out how not to die. Once somebody figures that out, then I will really, say that they're intelligent. But Jared and we had a great discussion. We really did. And he was very cordial. And I was very surprised because you would think of him as being a racist. And he told me, he said, Blacks never invented a building, a two-story building in Africa. And they never invented this. And all the things that he claimed that Blacks never invented, I never saw a need for that because I've been to Africa and you can see the vastness of it. And so there was no need to build a two-story building when you have all this vastness. But we didn't agree there. He said that Blacks and whites really just tend to come together on a base level, food and sex and alcohol and things like that. And I had kind of a problem with that as well. But I would not necessarily call him a racist. I remember him saying that, pygmy people compare the pygmy people to the people in Sweden. But I mean, you know, the pygmy people, they've been known to live long lives, and they're intelligent in their domain. And of course, the people of Sweden are intelligent in their domain. So I'm thinking about these things, you know, and I'm wondering about this whole notion of superiority and inferiority. And all this is leading up to my film, because I've noticed my whole life that things are a little different. I'm having trouble finding out why they're different. But you know, growing up, I wound up joining all of these so-called Afrocentric religious groups. And of course, I've been with the Muslims, I've been with the Black Hebrew Israelites, and all of these other Black organizations that depict Jesus as Black. And so it made me feel good for a minute. I was like, wow, Jesus is Black, you know? And so I was on this kick for years. I mean, Jesus is Black, and we were made to suffer for 400 years, and now our time is coming around, and he's going to come back and get his people and all this stuff. So I was pretty much smitten by just an idea that that the Son of God was a Black man. Well, that didn't last too long. I got to thinking, you know, if Jesus was Black, he's got a lot of explaining to do. And if Jesus is Black, why would Blacks be on the bottom of so many categories in society? Educationally speaking, economically speaking, health-wise. And to me, it was a little more insulting to make that claim that Jesus was Black and look at the position that Blacks were in. And I thought, like Anthony Penn, who you'll see in my film, Holy Hierarchy, maybe from the vantage point of God, maybe Black people are the Moabites. Maybe we are the Mennonite, the Hittites, and the people that God crushed, the people that he just exterminated because they weren't, you know, if there was a God, from his vantage point, maybe Blacks are those people, but we tend to see ourselves as those people who will one day be rescued and escorted on a magic carpet to heaven. And all we have to do is just wait on the Lord. So I found it very insulting to see Jesus as Black and all the disciples as Blacks and things like that. And then I thought, you know, if Jesus actually existed in the first place and he expected humanity to follow him and obey his rules, because actually Jesus is God in the flesh, according to Christianity. And if this God expected us to obey his commandments and follow his rules, then he clearly had no understanding, you know, of the very nature of human beings who he has claimed to create. If this God expected human beings not to kill one another, especially when it comes to, you know, survival, the survival of themselves or their family, then he clearly had no understanding of the very nature of all animals. If this God expected humans not to lie or to steal, especially in the face of danger or survival, then he clearly made a blunder in his creation. If he expected humans to love one another and want to express this feeling in a sexual way, irrespective of any type of marriage certificate, then this God, again, clearly did not understand the very nature of his creation. I moved to Atlanta about 25 years ago from Cincinnati, and I noticed that the South was a lot different than the North. If you know, some people call Ohio the Midwest, whatever, but I know it's farther north than Atlanta is, than Georgia is. But I noticed that people would ask you what church you went to before they would even ask you your name. You would say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Jay. What church you go to?" And I was like, "Whoa!" I was really taken aback by this because up north, you didn't really get crucified if you didn't go to church. Of course, 82% of Black people were members of churches. I actually went to one of the largest churches in Cincinnati. It was called Tridestone Baptist Church. I know it's not the largest now because they've got a couple big ones now, but there was just not a lot of backlash, not a lot of ridicule. I noticed things were a little bit different here in Atlanta. And I imagine that you guys in Minnesota really don't have that problem that we do here in the South. People were really committed. And when I told people that I did not go to church, I was looked upon very strangely. I was looked upon as a sinner, a heathen, a person who just didn't understand, and I needed to go to church. But from an empirical standpoint, as I looked around Atlanta, there's one point in Atlanta where you could stand in one spot and you can actually see about 6 or 7 churches from that one spot. And I'm not exaggerating. There's probably about 6 or 7 churches. If you stand in this one spot on the west part of Atlanta, west end of Atlanta, you can see about 6 or 7 churches. And this community in Atlanta was very downtrodden. It was a community that you just would not want to live in at the time. Of course, it's been gentrified, but at that time, it was just in disarray, in disrepair. And I thought, why are all these churches surrounding the Black community if the Spirit of God exists and is present amongst Black people, if present in the church, then why are the surrounding areas laden with so many problems? So I asked a lady, she was sitting on the curb and she was begging for money. And I asked her, "Are your prayers being answered?" And she said, "Yes, all of my prayers are being answered." And I wondered why she was begging from me and others if all her prayers were being answered. And so I knew that the time had come for me to write a book. And so I wrote my first book called Holy Lockdown: Does the Church Limit Black Progress? And I wanted to know if there was a correlation between high praise and low productivity. Of course, Blacks were made to take on this belief system that was given to them by their slave owners. And why we would be so engaged with a belief system that was forced upon us was really beyond me. And it really made me understand the magnitude and the depth and the degree of pain that a leather whip on a bare back would cause, and would cause someone to do, would cause someone to believe. And so their common sense goes out the window. And it's a lot of fear and a lot of backlash in the community because God in the Black community has been described as a Black woman with a belt. And I remember one time I told my mother that I didn't believe in God. I was like 16 years old. I got slapped in the face. And so these type of things tend to stay with you. They last a long time. But again, I was an outlier. I was one of those people who just always asked questions. I remember being 15 years old and I was in Mr. Schrader's class and he was talking about King Henry VIII and how he had this venereal disease and all this kind of stuff. And I raised my hand. I said, "Mr. Schrader, how is this going to help us when we graduate, us learning that King Henry VIII had a venereal disease? And why are Black people who, are in this class, why are we learning about King Henry VIII?" And he told me, to come after, that he would see me after class, and he told me not to disrupt and all this stuff. But I've always been that type of inquisitive person. And so when I wrote the book, I was expecting, before I wrote it, I went to try to find resources for that book. And I was surprised that there were none. In fact, I do believe that my book is the first book written by a Black person that actually criticized the institution of the Black church. And so I found no references. And one day I got a phone call from a gentleman. He had probably the largest Black syndicated radio show in the country, Michael Baisden. And he called me and he said, I like your book. I read it. I want you to be on the show. And I made about maybe 8, 9, 10 appearances on his show. And that's when the book actually went national. I started getting national attention and speaking in various places. And so one thing led to another. But what has surprised me the most is that I just have never gotten the backlash that I had anticipated. And one of my biggest surprises is that the older people that are 70, 75, and 80 years old, they're often the ones to offer me the greatest amount of encouragement. Son, keep doing what you're doing. I'm 80 years old. I have the same pain as everybody else. I'm not exempt from bills. I've had children to go to prison. My house has been taken over where I couldn't pay my taxes. But I've done everything according to what my preacher has asked me to do. I've prayed. I've been faithful. I've tithed. And, it's crazy that since 1980, Black people have tithed approximately 420 billion, that's with a B, to the church. And when we get out of church, we have nothing to show for it. And I find this amazing that a lot of our Black preachers, they will go and buy, they live very luxurious lives. And of course, when you don't pay taxes, and you're able to have tax-free this and tax-free that because you're a 501c3 organization, you can live a pretty good life. And so we find this dynamic in the Black community. We've actually taken $65 million, actually I think it was 70 to be exact, and gave it to Creflo Dollar so he can buy a Learjet and fly to different places and practice being, a missionary. In 2010, I wrote another book. It was called The New Doubting Thomas. I thought that this book, I really went into detail about the origins of the Bible and how we arrived at where we are psychologically. And it's time to question our commitment and our faith and our blind belief to Christianity, to religion itself. The whole title of the book is called The New Doubting Thomas, The Bible, Black Folks, and Blind Belief. And so that book did not receive as much attention as Holy Hierarchy, but it did, pretty well. I think that Black people, of course, are still in denial about a lot of things. I just did an interview the other day, and he said, look, if religion is so-called powerless, then why were they trying to kill Dr. Martin Luther King? If religion was so-called powerless, why were they trying to kill Malcolm X? If religion was so-called powerless, then why are you trying to kill this person and kill that person? And so I told him, I said, well, they weren't trying to kill the religion. They were trying to kill them because they were Black men. Had nothing to actually do with religion. And if religion was so powerful, then why, again, are Blacks on the bottom? In 2010, I also created a documentary series called Slave Sermons, which you can find on YouTube. If you just Google Slave Sermons, I think I have about 50 or 51 episodes. And they're 10 minutes or less little snippets that illustrate the trauma that religion causes, particularly among Black people. And so I use a lot of humor. I think you'll find that, a lot of them very humorous. And I've had good success with that. I haven't created one in a while, but I will start back creating slave sermons. And then what led me to this latest film, well, let me go back to Contradiction. Contradiction, I created that in 2013. And what that did was really address why there are so many churches. It did the same thing that New Doubting Thomas, that Holy Lockdown did, but it took it a step further where it talked about, it asked people why they were so committed. It asked them questions. You're a Baptist? Well, where did baptism come from? And it just illustrated that we are just blindly being led. And everybody tends to be afraid to ask questions. In the Black community, you are pretty much a product of what your parents were, what your mom was, what your grandmother was. And we tend to find it to be spitting on grandma's grave, so to speak. And if we, question our belief system that was given to us and told us by such a lovely person, a person who washed us, a person who cared for us, and so to question that is kind of blasphemous. But I think that grandma would be happy that we questioned that. If she were alive and were able to see where we are today. Black people have the same economic net worth, believe it or not, since 1867. We have the same net worth, collective net worth today as we did in the 1800s. And a lot of that obviously is due to racism, but a lot of it is also deals with misprioritizing where we put our money. And we take 10% of our income, of our first fruits, as we like to call it in church, and we give it to the church. I think that 10% could be served in much better ways. It can go to your child's tutor, because many have problems with science and math, that they could be tutored more effectively and understanding if they had a tutor. But it's very hard getting through with this whole COVID thing. You've either done one of two things. You've either gotten more religious or you've gotten less religious, because you see this guy could not handle this microscopic virus, but he's responsible for creating all these big things, the mountains and the ocean, but he had no control over something like a virus. And again, my thing is if there was a God, then he would be able to serve humanity best by operating in the realm of prevention, as opposed to people appealing to this God after damages have already been done, after the hurricanes have already happened. Why didn't you just stop the hurricane in the first place? The first slave ship to arrive in North America was called the good ship Jesus. If there was a God, why didn't he make that ship sink? Why didn't he make the passage, the so-called middle passage back and forth to Africa, make these boats, sink into the waters, never to be heard from again? But this God has never acted in the realm of prevention. Why? Because the idea of a God with a personality is pretty much something that I don't think that a person with intelligence should subscribe to. In 2008, I'm going to get back to why, what led me to the book. I'm sorry, to the latest film that I want you guys to check out. Like I said, you can also check out Contradiction, which is also on Amazon Prime. Contradiction, A Question of Faith. But also, what led me to this newest project, Holy Hierarchy, does the church limit, Holy Hierarchy, the religious roots of racism in America. In 2008, after having heard about my book, Holy Lockdown, I was invited to attend classes at Interdenominational Theological College here in Atlanta. It's the largest Black theological school in the country. And I've actually spoken there on 2 occasions. And they received me with open arms. And like I said, I noticed one thing about believers: you got to know something in order to create some backlash. And so after I speak, if you really don't know anything, I don't think I'm going to get the backlash, because I'm going to have something to say behind your criticism, because you really don't know. And there was an article back in, what was it, NPR, I think, did this, how atheists actually know more about their belief system than believers do. And so I thought that was amazing, that here you are, you're a believer, you go to church every day, and you really don't know anything about what you're into. But anyway, I was invited to attend class there. Now, these classes weren't accredited. I wasn't getting any credit for it. He just wanted me to come and to see how they were preparing future pastors and future religious leaders. What were they teaching them before they actually went out in the community? And one thing I remember, he said, you know, during one of his classes, he said, make sure that when you become a pastor, you preach to the itching ear. I thought that was amazing. In other words, don't really tell the people what they need to know. Tell the people what they're accustomed to. Tell them what they want to hear. We had a term in the Black community, it was called, well, you know, we tried to get these preachers that were educated, and they got criticized because a lot of the people that went to church, the congregation, specifically a lot of the women, they were saying, you know, he got the learning, but he ain't got the burning, so to speak. So we wanted the burning. And so they went through measures to make sure you not only got the learning, but you got the burning with it. And so we've come up with pastors like T.D. Jakes, like with Creflo Dollar, and with, what's the other Black preacher? Well, he's deceased now, Bishop Eddie Long. And now we have Dr. Jamal Bryant that took his place. So these preachers have a little bit of burning. They know how to create the fire, because you want to leave church with a certain amount of emotional buttons that have been pushed. And so as I attended, I saw how they were being prepared to come out here and preach. And I ran across this book. It was called Shades of Freedom by A. Leon Higginbotham. And in that book, matter of fact, A. Leon Higginbotham, he worked under the Clinton administration. It took him about 16 years to comprise a lot of the information. He was in one of the Supreme Circuit Court of Appeals. And it took him about 16 years. He went to Purdue. He said that he remembered going to Purdue, and the Blacks in the college, they didn't have, you know, any heat during, you know, the cold winters of Indiana. And he started compiling it, you know, back in, I think, the early 80s, I believe. But anyway, he went back to the 1700s, and he went and gathered about 30 to 35 or so court cases that led to the various precepts that formed the basis of racism. And I thought it was really interesting, because I never really associated religion with racism. I thought they were two separate things. I thought that religion was one thing and that racism was another thing. I didn't put the two together. But then it dawned on me that there were certain steps that were taken in order to make racism an institution. And a lot of these court cases, that some of them I outlined in the film, I don't want to give it away, but I do outline it in the film, were stepping stones And it led to the precepts. And I thought that was a powerful word, precepts, because it actually, you know, it's like it teaches people how to think about other people. There are certain unwritten laws or implicit understandings of people. There was an implicit understanding that blacks were inferior people to whites. There was an implicit understanding that there was a God who divinely created blacks, whites, and created blacks to be their servants. Although that was not written in their laws, it was implicit. And by reading the book, I learned that Virginia, wow, we've moved out of Virginia, but many of us still have a Virginia state of mind. We can move out of Virginia, but it's difficult to take the mind of Virginia out of people, because that's where all of our superstars of America, they live. 7 of the first 12 presidents were born in Virginia. And I think 9 or 10 of the first 12 presidents owned human beings. As a matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson had about 175 to 200 slaves at the time that he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And so I realized that, wow, if you really don't understand Virginia, you really don't understand the real nature of racism in this country. Because that tree was planted, but it's been able to take roots all over the United States. And so I realized, wow, this is a legal matter. Jim Crow was a legal matter. Apartheid was a legal matter. They have put these things into the law to create an institution of racism. And so my definition of racism actually changed. I don't see a man in West Virginia or a man somewhere in New Hampshire or Minnesota, for that matter, or wherever you may be, waving a Confederate flag and saying, you know, and calling this guy a racist. Now, I own a business here in Georgia, alluding to, you know, what Jan's opening, you know, comments were concerning Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. I have hired felons. I've hired about, matter of fact, well, no, he came back. So right now it's still at 21. I've hired about 20 to 21 felons since I've been in business. This is all I pretty much hired. And so I noticed that racism, my definition is a little bit different. It's a legal matter. I don't consider a person, like I said, waving a flag somewhere and calling this person a racist. In my business, I know white guys who have Confederate emblems painted on their trucks, and they come in. One calls me brother. We have a good conversation. I don't see that person as a racist. To me, racism is the legal backing of a group's prejudices, bigotry, biases, stereotypes, and ignorance. So if I walk down the street and you call me the N-word, I don't really see that as racist. I may see it as prejudice, like Dr. D'Angelo said in my film. We all have degrees of prejudices. But when you torment me and beat me up and black my eye, or shoot and kill one of my loved ones, and we go to court and there's nothing done about it, that's racism. Because it's the legal backing of a group's violence, a group's prejudice, a group's stereotypes, biasness, bigotry, and hatefulness, and ignorance. And so I realized, wow, this would be a great film to talk about. The film is also heavy on iconography. I went, matter of fact, this book right here, I don't know if you see it, but if you go in, you know, Barnes and Nobles or Borders, it says the origins or the story of Christianity. Of course, and it has the white picture of God. You know, you go throughout the book, not a black face in it. And so As we drive down I-75 here in Atlanta, we go to Florida quite often. We go down 75, we enter into a small town called Tipton, and there are billboards of white Jesuses all over. We just left Florida about 3 weeks ago. We went in a place, Cape Coral, Florida. We went and had breakfast, and on the way out, they had an image of a white Jesus. Now, if Jesus is white, then we all should really understand white supremacy a little better. If he's white now, why do we have a problem with white supremacy? I mean, if the Son of God is a white man, we should all really understand white supremacy a little bit better. I can see why whites would have their chest out, so to speak, and feel a little bit better because, my God, the Son of God is white. And like I said, if he's black, then he's got a lot of explaining to do. That's another subject for another day. We can talk about that all day, but I find that even more insulting. But the image tends to speak a little louder than the spoken word. Right now, as you know, when we get off of this, I see a picture right now. I don't know the gentleman, Richard. I see Richard right here, right? And I'm looking at the background. He's got some pictures up at the top. He's got a bookshelf there at the bottom. My subconscious can really tell you how many books and how that I actually saw on his bookshelf. Now, I don't have to sit here and count them, but my subconscious perceives things in totality. When you see an image of a white Jesus, it automatically tells your brain that Jesus, the God, must be white, because the natural thing is white son, white father. And so no black person should be subjected to having to go into Walmart or Walgreens or CVS or Sam's or any other store and be subjected to white images of Jesus. People ask me all the time, about Jesus, and I say, yes, Jesus is white, although I know he did not exist. He's a myth. The Bible is simply a retelling of pre-existing myths and legends. But Jesus is white. They say, well, Jeremiah, why do you say that? I say he's white because he's white in Walmart. Walmart is the largest retailer in the world, and it doesn't matter what the reality says. It matters what the perception is. Now, Christmas is coming up, and all throughout Minnesota, and all throughout Wisconsin, and all throughout the United States, you're going to see white nativity scenes. It's 12 o'clock. When you see these white nativity scenes, some of them might have a little black person in the background. I guess he was one of the wise men or something. I don't know. But the baby Jesus is white. What are you implying with that? So blacks have been victims of this. You just had a movie out a few years ago called Son of God, where all of the biblical the connections with God are white people. You've got Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson. All of the connections were white people. And I'm thinking, and you wonder why there are notions of superiority and notions of inferiority. If blacks and whites were two teams competing psychologically on American turf, whites would have the home field advantage. So me and my wife have created a nonprofit organization. It's called ERICA, E-R-I-C-A, and it stands for Ending Religious Iconography in America. And I don't know how successful it's going to be. We're going to try to do what we can to bring attention to how these icons that still exist today, I don't care where you go. And this is today. I'm not talking about 1920. I'm talking about 2020. You go in the airport, if you go in hospitals, schools, universities, like I said, CVS, Walmart, Walgreens, Sam's, Hobby Lobby, especially. I don't know if you guys have a Hobby Lobby there. If you have a Hobby Lobby, just go walk into Hobby Lobby and see the presence, feel the presence of white supremacy that's in that store, where you see a lot of the blacks that are working there, here, especially here in Georgia. Probably not in Minnesota, but here in Georgia, you got 75% of your workforce in Hobby Lobby are black people. And the store exudes white supremacy. Everywhere you go, there's images around. And so I find that it's very hard to talk about. We can say that we don't want to say the N word. When it comes to people, in the gay community, you don't want to say the F word when it comes to men. But how come we don't talk about the S word and the I word? And I'm not talking about Sports Illustrated. I'm talking about the notions of superiority and inferiority. This exists. And you don't have to say a word, but through imagery, I can go to probably about 25% of the churches, black churches here in Atlanta, and I will see white Jesus stained into the window. Right now. Now, for any white to tell me, well, that doesn't matter. Okay, let's reverse it. You remember that movie, A Time to Kill? And I'm going to cut it short. I know I'm running over time. But you remember the movie Time to Kill, when Matthew McConaughey was the attorney, and he told everybody, there was a crime committed against a young black girl. And he told the congregation, the jury, which was all white, to close their eyes. He said, now imagine they're white. And they all opened their eyes and they said, wow, I didn't think about that. Imagine you as a white person having to go throughout the United States and see all iconography, all biblical iconography, all things of divinity, whether you go to Holy Cross or Notre Dame or Baylor College or any other Christian college, Davidson, and I can name so many of them. Go to these various Christian colleges and all these images were black. How would you feel as a white person if the default button was hit to black iconography? My phone is replete with white iconography. Everywhere I go, I capture it. If I go to the flea market, you're going to see images of white Jesus. I test cars at my business. You open the car, you see little icons next to the odometer of white Mary and white Jesus. What does this say? Now, like Robin DiAngelo said, there may be arguments on whether to tear down a Confederate statue, but we're not even arguing about white nativity scenes. There's not even a discussion about it. There's not even a discussion about the white magazines and the white iconography that exist in airports and hotels all over the United States. And so I find that racist. Now, we could talk about Donald Trump. I don't want to get into politics, but I say this: you can't talk about religion without talking about Christianity. And you can't talk about Christianity without talking about white supremacy. They're all intertwined. And I say this about Trump: of all the stuff that he said and done, and believe me, I am not inundating my day and my time with what Trump said or didn't say. I've got better things to do. I've got grandchildren I want to deal with than to worry about what Trump said or didn't say. But one of the things that I said, that I did hear him say, that I thought was one of, if not the most racist thing that he's ever said, and that includes the incident that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. He said, oh no, we're not tearing down any statues of Jesus. You see, now, if you want to see this country up in arms, start dismantling the iconography that exists of white Jesus across this country. You want to see some stuff go, you want to see whites change their position, because you can kumbaya with me through George Floyd and hold hands and we are as one and do all of these things together. But if you really want to see an impact and see the real nature of this country, tell them that it's against the law to put out a white nativity scene to where we're going to see this white Jesus. Tell whites that it's going to be against the law that they can't put up this billboard. And when I say iconography, I mean black iconography, Mexican iconography, red iconography, Indian iconography, all types of icon, none. It should not exist because you're teaching people who may not have a strong constitution, their very nature, what it is. Who designed them, so to speak, if you're into creationism. And how, and again, with whites, it's reinforced because you're going to say, God must be white because it appears as though whites have everything. It appears as though whites have a better standard of living, a better quality of life. So he must be white, irrespective of the historical circumstances that has gone on to produce the situation of inequality that we have in this country. And so I want to make one last point. As far as, you've been hearing a lot of blacks talking about equality. Listen, I've never read anything about a conqueror who stole your land, who stole your resources. And that's really where racism started, is the exploitation of a group's resources. See, and you have to justify why you're mistreating them because they're really not human. They really weren't made the same way as white people were made. And so this is kind of a misnomer here. Slavery is not racism. Slavery was about economics. Racism is the justification of mistreatment that came from that. But as far as equality, I've never known of a conqueror who has stolen your land, stolen your resources, kidnapped you, enslaved you, and held you in bondage for hundreds of years, and then turn around and share everything equally with you. That would render slavery in vain. The reason slavery existed was to create an equation of white over non-white, so whites would have privileges that blacks would not have. And so this is where we are right now, but I want you to watch the film. I hope that you would. I hope that you enjoy it. My email is slavesermons@gmail.com. Please send me an email, tell me what you think. But I will encourage you to do this. If you do watch the film, please, please, please leave a comment, because Amazon has this thing where they need engagement in order to keep your film going. So if I can get all the engagement to, watch it, whether your comments are good or bad, believe me, I'm a big boy. I've got my big boy uniform on, so I can take it. But I don't want to go any further. I know I've gone past my time, but if you guys have any questions, please ask me. And don't worry about being all politically correct. Just ask the questions that you feel.
Well,
Could you repeat your email address again?
The email address is slavesermons, plural, sermons, @gmail.com. Slave Sermons, and that's the name of a series that I have on YouTube. And if you watch that series, there's a lot of white preachers that I have on there. I mean, you're going to find it humorous and you're going to really like it. So check out that and encourage your friends and family to watch that. But I'm sorry, I didn't really have a story to talk about. Go ahead, Charles.
Well, just first of all, I'd like to thank our sinner and heathen for his comments. You self-identified as a sinner and heathen, I believe. And remind everybody of the name of the film so that if you look for it on Amazon Prime, you'll find it. It's Holy Hierarchy, The Religious Roots of Racism in America. Now, Jeremiah, I have a couple of, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit by quoting you from some of our previous conversations. And one of the ones was that I think you've already covered a concept that I wrote down at the time. If you don't integrate the money, it's still Jim Crow. And that, I think you've just commented about that a moment ago, but you made another observation, which I wrote down: isms need schisms. Isms need schisms. And
Yeah.
I've given that a lot of thought. And I wonder if you could, first of all, explain the comment and then maybe expand on it a little. And while you're doing that, other people will be thinking of questions.
All right, sure. Yeah. I say the isms need schism. Every ism, whether it's capitalism, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, hell, feudalism, whatever, they need some type of divide. They need a schism that you buy into in order to maintain their ism and in order to maintain their system. And they buy into it with the masses of the people. You're always going to have your outliers, but you buy into it with the masses of the people. Our ism that we have here that's created by the media is our schism that's created by the media is the schism of black and white. Now, in reality, if you watch CNN and they have all this, and I haven't watched the news since March. I'm going on 7 months now that I haven't watched the news. And I feel very good. I feel very liberated. I'm free from all that because I don't find what's going on in the real world as I hear and see that's going on in the news. I know these things do exist, but I don't want to go too much into that. But there's this schism that exists between black and whites. Now, if you watch CNN, if you're going to spend half of the time talking about the problems that blacks and whites have, how they're not getting along and this and that, then you have to create balance because we have to have balance in our life. So the other part should be the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of interactions that happen between blacks and whites every day that are positive, that never get reported. As a black person, and many blacks can testify to this, we've gotten pulled over many times, but we're not going to, no one's going to talk about the times we got pulled over by white police officers where they said thank you and yes ma'am and no sir. I'm not saying that they're not some bad people, but what I'm saying is that white cop who's bad is not an indictment on all white people. So the schisms that I'm talking about have to occur my screen just went black, has to take place with a homogenizing element. And I call that homogenizing element the news media. It wants to homogenize us. It wants to gather all the sheep and put us on this and dictate the direction of where our attention goes. Here in Atlanta, I deal with whites all the time. Maybe 30, 35% of my business is white people. And we're cordial, we're cool. We don't have that problem. But if I was to watch the news, there's a good chance I'm going to come outside paranoid. There's a good chance I'm going to come outside fearful. And there's a good chance that I'll believe, Charles, that if you sneeze right now, I'm going to catch that virus through my computer. So we have some schisms that are going on. I can elaborate more, but that's part of the film. I'm still working those things out. But yeah, your first comment about the money, I mean, come on now. Equality means I have what you have. Blacks are not going to be equal, not in this country. There's only 3 ways that blacks, I think, are really going to make some progress and get anywhere close to so-called equality in this country. That's going to be a good 125 years from now, because each generation is about what, 22 to 25 years or whatever. So you can't start with that first generation because they have to have offspring or whatever. So I'm looking at about 100, 125 years. The first way that blacks are going to, be so-called successful is, number one, is that we create our own Facebook, we create our own Zoom, we create our own Amazon, we create our own Netflix, etc. But we don't have that type of economic leverage. We don't have that type of opportunity. Number two is that of all of these hundreds or thousands of multi-million and billion-dollar corporations, that many of these or most of these corporations make black people or black person majority of their shareholder, which ain't gonna happen. And number three is amalgamation. One day, Jeff Bezos' grandson is going to be black. One day, Reed Hastings' granddaughter is going to be black. One day, what's the guy from Tesla? Can't remember his name.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, right.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to marry one of his children that's going to be black. And so there's going to be a natural merging of the races, because sex is always going to rule. You like who you like, regardless of the stigmas that are attached to them. But ultimately, you know, I think that race will dissolve, because if it is a social construct, sometimes it takes the human animal many, many years to catch on to the fact that, you know, I should be judged not how I look, but like Martin Luther King said many years ago, by the content of my character.
If you guys don't watch out, I'm going to have more questions. So somebody else should step up here.
I think I will. How do you do this? There you go. You had a part of what you spoke about was the power of images, the iconic, you know, everything you see is, of course, built into our brains. But the power of images are, I think they're more powerful than, you know, it's one of those passive things again that we don't become conscious of. But the more you see certain images, the more they're normalized. Of course, the more they're part of the story that we live in, and they become. And once something becomes part of the story in our lives, we kind of like to keep it the same way. So this notion about having things change gradually, I've come a little bit to the conclusion that that's like there's these big steps once in a while where it seems like a society takes a big step, but then there's always the backlash. And so in total, it is a slow movement trying to get the rights of our Constitution to all of our people all of the time. It's been a long, tough road. It's still not there.
I'd like to comment on the fact that if there had been a Jesus, his skin tone would be more Semitic or more like Arabs.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've heard that, and again, I don't want to empower any community by connecting a son of God with them. So that's why I said ending religious iconography, and not just ending white religious iconography, but all iconography. You know, there was an episode, I remember, you guys probably remember the show Good Times back in the 70s with Esther Roll and John Amos. And there was an episode where they had a white Jesus on the wall. And Michael was always the young guy. He was like me. He was the one that was asking questions and like, Mom, this is not the real image of Jesus. Well, Esther Roll, the mom, defended that. She said, this is my Jesus. This is the one that I have been worshiping for all of these years. And so I say that because some of the biggest pushback that you'll get is with Black people. You know, my door is probably marked now from the Jehovah's Witnesses that will come around and knock on my door. They probably know better than to knock on my door now. I'm very nice. I'm very courteous. I am. I'm not mean spirited to them, but I think they just don't want to. They'd rather just not fight about it. But anyway, one of the things I asked a couple Black witnesses that came to my door was, how come all these Watchtower magazines that you have, how come Jesus is always white? And their first response is always, well, it doesn't matter what color he is. Well, if it doesn't matter what color he is, then why is he always white? Why can't he be Black? And so this will be, you know, it's crazy because in Nigeria, I think it has probably it's either the first or the second largest icon statue of white Jesus on earth. I think the one in Sao Paulo, in Rio de Janeiro, might be the largest one. The one that sits up over the mountains, with outstretched arms. But the image that they just erected in Nigeria, I think back in 2015 or 2016, it actually rivals that. So here we got a Black country that has been so indoctrinated and has seen white Jesus so much that, like you said, the previous guest said, that it's been normalized. So these things are quite normal for us. And for us not to even have a discussion about the angels, the disciples, and all the people at the Last Supper, everything, all the movies that come out, for us not to even be discussing that, it shows you how much normalization is taking place. That movie where the little boy said that he saw Jesus and it later was a hoax, and he said he had blue eyes and all of this type of stuff. Many Black people went to see that movie. Matter of fact, we're the #1 moviegoers in the United States. So when I presented a little film about that, little segment about that, I was hit with backlash by Black people. And I thought that was really amazing. But this is what we're going to, once we start changing the imagery, this country will go to a place it's never been. But we're going to have to do that if we want some sense of equivalency when it comes to the superiority, that there's no one superior than the next person. No one inferior and no one is superior. But it starts with that icon, what your customer's seeing.
I think we go further than you do, that racism, while it is a legal matter, is first of all a mental attitude.
Yeah, I go into that in the film. I do. I talk about the mental attitude, how it starts in the mind. I do go into that into the film. So as a matter of fact, you'll see that probably like the first 20 minutes of the film. You'll see a white guy out there by the ocean, and I talk about how it's a mindset right there. But again, that mindset, it has to come from somewhere. Just like you had gold once backed the dollar bill to give it its value. Something had to give the notion of supremacy. When you create value, when you improve something, you create the value in it. And there's some type of notion that exists that says, I'm more valuable than you are, but that had to start somewhere. And it's a seamless transition to believe in a supreme being and then believe in a supreme human being. And that's what the film does. The film explains how the notions during colonial America of a supreme being led to notions of supreme human beings, and how these notions work their way into the legal system, ultimately turning racism into an institution.
I'd like to jump into this conversation and suggest that removing the idea of race for a minute and looking at some of the latest research that's being done, where they've taken children and they take a game, how we've all played the game where you spin the spinning thing and it lands on something. And what they've done is they've taken and created a pie that has an orange or a green marker on it. And then whatever that lands on, they give the child a t-shirt of that color. And then they give the child these pictures that, are gauged to children. They look like children actually drew them. and they start asking them questions based on what they're watching. And there's always a child with wearing an orange or a green t-shirt. And depending on what goes on in that sequence, if the child, what happens is the child identifies with the child in the picture wearing the same color. And almost invariably, the good guys are the guys that wear my t-shirt and the bad guys are the other guys. And it doesn't make any difference. And they can switch the t-shirts around and the attitude changes around. So basically what we're learning is that inherently in us, we tend to be group. And the fact that, we have colored groups, we just somehow, when racism builds on that innate part of us, and it goes from there. But I don't know that it has to do with black or white or yellow. It just happens to be we as human beings identify by group primarily, and watch it in football games or whatever. So
Right.
I think that's the basis of it, and the rest of it just kind of escalates from there.
I agree. Daryl Ray, the author of The Godfathers, he's in my film. And he talks about that tribal component. He said basically it's really just a tribe. If you look like look like me, you probably are in my tribe. If you don't look like me, you probably are not in my tribe. And so you're right, it is a tribal component that human beings just have. I mean, if you can go to the jungle and you can see deer. And it's amazing that these deer and these antelope and these gazelles, they look so much alike to us. But it's crazy because you'll have a specific type of antelope with the white tip tail, and they will be with the antelopes with the white tip tail, even though they all look so similar. So I think that tribal component is present in all animals.
Yeah, and so somehow we have to kind of work through that.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
Humans have a lot of built-in biases and preferences that the way I understand it, the only way that you can get past them is humans have to know about them. They have to be aware of that inner granular way of thinking. And then they have to be aware of how it's not working for the whole society, for everybody to pay attention, to just passively not be aware of it. Making awareness of how poor our perception skills are, and making awareness of some of these old the things we once needed to survive that we do not need to survive anymore, knowing that they still exist in our how our brain works. That's, to me, I don't know, there might be some other way, but to me that's the only way, is just bring awareness to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, I would think that's one of the things that these studies are showing, that somehow we need to slow down our brain at some point to get past that immediate jump in however we're going to respond to a situation. So that's something we need to learn as human beings, because our first response is going to be an emotional one.
Television advertising does a pretty good job of showing a variety of facial skin tones. But of course, they want to sell to everybody too.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy you mentioned that. I was actually looking for these two magazines that I saw a few years back in Walgreens, and one said Black Beauty. It was two women on the cover, and one said Beauty, and then one said Black Beauty. And I was like, wow, that shows that beauty, just in general, innately is white. But then there's this other beauty that's black. And these two magazines existed, but I mean, we've had no reason to question that, because this has just been the norm. And even Black people don't really see that. But then what we see and what we've internalized by way of imagery has really affected what we believe. And then what we believe has impacted what we do.
You know
And
what's
so, here
what
we are. Mhm.
you're kind of surprising me when you're telling me that the same things in our culture that whites don't notice because they're the majority of the culture, quite often people who are not the majority of our culture don't notice it either.
Yeah, right. Because one thing you're talking about, I mean, is listen, if you go around the world, it's very hard to find people like African Americans. And I say that because Black people in this country, unlike other people around the world, are not products organically of what their culture has bestowed them with. Your culture is how far you were from the river, how long you had to walk to get your water, where you fished, what your music was, what's your rules of engagement, what are your rules in terms of marriage and mating, what's your science of mating. Those are things, what you eat. These are things that build your culture. Blacks have never had that opportunity. Our culture has been imposed upon us. So it's going to take a lot longer than 100-something years to find your culture. And I don't even know if it will ever be found because there's pieces of Black culture that are missing that we'll never get back. That we'll never know. We don't speak our language. We don't. We observe holidays that had nothing to do with us. Frederick Douglass told us about that back in his autobiography. Christmas and Thanksgiving and Halloween. We've been told that New Year's somehow is in the dead smack of wintertime instead of, March when things are blossoming and you see new life emerging. So we've never really had a true culture. It's been one that has been imposed. And so you will find these things that are, that whites don't notice, that we don't notice also, because we're so similar in our culture. Blacks, we don't stand out to say, and like I said, I've never engaged in any of the holidays. My children, Christmas, Thanksgiving, any of that, not because I didn't like white people, because it had nothing to do with Black folks. It's like this. There has to be a mutual exchange of respect. Are whites engaging in Juneteenth? Are whites engaging in Kwanzaa? No, I don't. As a Black person, I'm not putting green on during St. Patrick's Day. That has nothing to do with me. And I've managed to save a lot of money. I haven't celebrated Christmas probably since I was like 14 or 15 years old. And my children haven't either, but we never made them. We say, look, you can go to church, you can celebrate whatever you want. Like my daughter puts up a tree. She doesn't really believe in it, but she just does it to keep the peace. But we told them, you can go to church, you can do whatever. They all are non-believers like us. They don't go to church, they understand religion, but we gave them an option to do that. And I just think that sometimes the way to find your culture is you have to have certain things that you just don't do.